Union Station was where it was all happening. It was the activity part of town. 25th Street was on the end of it, or started from it, and all the action in Ogden was on 25th Street. And if you wanted to know what was going on in town, you came down here to the station or 25th Street.
Before the railroad came to town in 1869, this was maybe more than one horse, but not more than two or three. It was a very small town. It sold supplies to people taking stuff to the mines up in Idaho and Montana, just kind of a wide spot in the roadway station. And when the railroads got here, it just transformed this place overnight. The population doubled and doubled again in months.
When I came in, the railroad was quite active when I first came here. There was a lot of transportation going on, a lot of folks coming through. So it was a busy place. This place was, Union Station was, because a lot of folks at that time had not started to travel by airplane. They were still using the railroad to travel. And so it was quite busy. It was busy when I came here, because I would come down and pick folks up that rode the train into Ogden. Because that was a major, especially for African Americans that I knew, my family, they rode the train into Ogden because it was a way with the transportation.
We had our wedding here at Union Station, and the reception line was in the grand lobby, and then this area here was where the reception was. And at the time, there was an Amtrak train that from here it went to San Francisco. And that's where Barbara and I went on our honeymoon and got on the Amtrak train and rode down to San Francisco.
We'd drive down and park behind what was the Shoop Williams Candy Company and watch the trains. I enjoyed that as a kid, and so I would bring my children down sometimes once, two or three times, maybe a month, or once a week, and after we'd had supper, we could come down here and park the car and watch the locomotives pull out the steam, and then eventually it turned to the diesels going, and they weren't as much fun as a steam locomotive.
Used to be a lot of boxing matches, in the main area. They used to have boxing matches in there Friday or Saturday. And, put a little ring in. I don't know how they got all the people in there, but that's something we used to come in and watch a lot of boxing matches.
I just very distinctly remember coming into the station, and of course there were lots of big wooden benches at that time, people waiting for trains and coming and going. You had to go downstairs to a subway, and you walked underneath the tracks. There was once 11 passenger tracks here, where now we only have 2. So there was a subway that went the distance, but I remember that it was often cold, and I could smell the steam engines and the diesel smells, and you could hear the clunk, and the steam of the release of the locomotives up above.
You go in there and you think, wow, this is awesome. Because to us as kids, that was huge. And it was busy all the time because the Union Station was, people going in and out all the time because they're boarding the train or they're coming off of the train. And so you see a lot of different people come through. They had a magazine rack and comic books and things like that. So I went there to get cliff notes for my book report. But yeah, I mean, it was something on a grand scale. It was really, it's pretty awesome when you're little.
I remember a hustle bustle in the Union Station. And the conductors and oh the Lord. It was just an amazing time for me because again it was like a special treat. Right.
Famous people would come in and out through there, and I didn't know that, but celebrities and things, they were all on the train. Well, there was one time when I was working in the grocery store, and this lady was walking down the street with a cane and wore all black and then had a veil on her hat, wide brim hat with a veil. I thought, wow, that is what an odd-looking person, whoever that is. And found out later that it was Eleanor Roosevelt. Yeah, she didn't want anybody to know who she was, but she was curious about the famous 25th Street, because I guess it was known all over that was a Western bar town or something. I don't know. But anyway, she's heard about 25th Street, so she just walked up and down just to see what it was like.
Herbert Hoover. It came through on a train one night. It was going to San Francisco. And he got off the train and was walking around the yard. And I walked up to him and I said, President Hoover, can I have your signature? And I handed him a pad, a piece of paper and a pen, and he wrote, the best wishes of Herbert Hoover. Our job was to fill orders from the commissaries and from the trains. We would get telegraph reports from trains coming through Ogden that wanted linen and food. And it was our job to meet the train, provide them the food that they wanted, and meet the dining car as it came through town and put that food and that stuff in the dining car.
And the Union Pacific had the Union Pacific Band. And that band was made of Ogdenites, and my father was the only non-Union Pacific employee in the band, because he was a good clarinetist, and I guess they needed him. And they'd play the music for the Ogden Rodeo when the horses would come out bucking, just like they have music today. They had a live band for those rodeos.
When I was a sophomore in high school, I interviewed for the job down at the Union Station, and the Western Union office was in the far southeast end of the building. So I would pick up the telegram, come back here, and go down the steps, and then you go to the track where the particular train was and go up and get on the train where the person was supposed to be, and then I would go through the train, telegram for Mr. Larson, whatever, up and down the train till I hopefully found the person, give them the telegram, and then come back into the office. Then at 10 o'clock at night, I would gather up my leather bag and ride up 25th Street, and at that time, all the bars and everything. And then I would stop at the Greyhound bus station on Grand Avenue and 25th Street and go in and get the Western Union phone booth there where people could go and send a telegram and get the money out of that phone. And when I'd get the money out, there would be drunks laying on the seats there in the train station most of the time, and they'd hear the rattle of the coins and they'd perk up, And so by that time, when they were finally coming awake, I'd have my money in my leather pouch, and I'd jump on my bike and head over to the office, turn in my money, and head home.
Brakeman was more than I realized. They would signal when to slow down and when to start up. The passenger trains had that right away. So if he was on a freight train as a brakeman, then they'd have to go in the siding. And so he'd have to see that the switch was turned right so that it would go on the track and get out of the way. At the passenger train, or it would be not a good thing, crash. So they had signals to back up and stop. And this was the actual one that he used. And this was the slow down, I think it was. Or stop, I don't know.
So there were different
There were
signals
signals.
they used with the lantern.
Yeah, and then they'd swing it around, I think, to come back or something. I don't know. Somebody will probably correct that.
Okay, engineer. Well, we run the engine, you know, we control that. The conductor, he handles all the paperwork, talks to the dispatch most of the time. Does the switching and goes out there, watches the train if it needs to be inspected and whatnot, you know. That's pretty much what he does. And in the winter, this time of year, the engineer has a good job. Because, you know, you're not out there, and, you know, 6 feet of snow walking up there, you know, and it's, you just wait for him to come back about an hour or two later. Beforehand, he used to work, you might say if you work 8 hours, you work less than 8 hours, they'll be calling you back in 6.5 hours. So, you know, they give you an hour and a half from the time they call you to get to work, 90 minutes or so. But yeah, that was tough. I remember I fell asleep one time and ran aside of another train here in Ogden. They didn't like me for that, but you know, because they're working us like that, 8 on, 8 off, you know, or 8 on, 6.5 hours, the phone's ringing. You know, that's not very much rest, it was constant. They had what they used to use, they had these sanders, and you hit this button and it sprays underneath by the wheels, it sprays that sand on there so you could get traction on the wheels. But yeah, we had plenty. I actually had crickets. They had called them Mormon crickets, you know, and they're horrible. Yeah, because they, for some reason, in between Elko and this place called Montel, going up that hill, there's just thousands of them, and they get on the tracks, and sometimes it gets stuck. Yeah, because they're greasy, you know, they're just, they're, it's not a nice sight, but yeah, and that was worse than ice on there.
My father, at the time, was a conductor on the Southern Pacific Railroad on freight trains. My dad got approval for me to go out on the freight train with him. And his crew was really great. The brakeman on the caboose, they treated me like I was one of the crew. And we'd look for hot boxes. And hot boxes are the packing that they would put in the wheels of the train to keep it getting too hot. But sometimes they did get hot and a fire would start. And they used to call it hot box. And so then they'd have to stop the train and go and take care of the problem.
My husband was a chef cook for the railroad, and he 39 years, and he had 4 brothers that worked for the railroad, 2 brother-in-laws that worked for the railroad. As a matter of fact, that was one of the prominent jobs for blacks at that time.
It was an upgrade, especially for the black set. I knew that was migrating from the South, and they had just left World War II. And so they didn't want to go back, I guess, sharecropping and things. So this was a step up for African-American males.
It was a group of guys that, even though they had their own separate identifications, they were all still like a close-knit family, really, you know. The churches mingled with each other, and they would visit on special days. I mean, if it was a New Zion's special day, then Emory Chapel would support us and we would support them. And it was just a community gathering, you know, just one of those things that just kept going around and around for years and years. There was a lot of nice restaurants in the black community. The barbecue stands, they had barbecue restaurants, beauty shops.
Had 2 barber
shops, yeah, I did.
Black barber shop,
cleaners, gas stations. We made our own community, you know. We just, everything that everybody else was doing, we did it in our community. The dances and the formals and the picnics and all of those things that we all are enjoying together now, we did them separately.
We were self-sufficient. You know, you had everything that you needed in the black community.
So my father was a laborer, so he would lay the tracks and measure them to ensure that the rail system was fine for the trains. And as a laborer, obviously, you know, those things were heavy, even the wood to hold it and frame it together. I remember him having lots of heavy tools, and that's one thing that he did show us, is these big old wrenches that I've never seen in my life. But I mean, to know that day in and day out, that's what he had to use, and then making sure that the measurements were right. I can only imagine how hard that was to lay those tracks. And then the elements, again, it didn't matter if it was sunny, hot, over 100-degree weather, or if it was blizzard. You know, living in Utah, we get horrible winter storms and having to shovel and keep the tracks clean. I mean, those were the elements that he had to work through.
Dad said that they were required to carry these heavy ties and move in positions where they needed to put them. And that sometimes if they weren't moving fast enough, because time was money, they would trip them. And I said, what? He says, yeah. You didn't know that? I said, no, Dad. He said, yeah, they would trip us.
It was considered a great job, not on the standards of Americans, though, because that was to feed a family of 5, and they still struggled. At the time, it was a fortune.
Being able to make ends meet, pay the bills, have a good home. I mean, that is the dream that a lot of immigrants want. And so settling here in Ogden, I truly believe that they were successful in my definition of success for coming from another country and being able to own a home, being able to own a car, and, you know, go to church on Sunday, make sure the kids went to school, and it was a good life.
I think about what they came here for. It was a big sacrifice to them. It was a big sacrifice. To leave their country, to leave their language, to leave their families, to leave the people that they grew up with, to a foreign land. How many people do that?
World War II broke out, and they were told that they were going to be sent to camp. And they got a message from someone saying, what you should do is move inland where you won't have to be incarcerated. And so they all jumped into a tomato truck and loaded everything on the tomato truck and came to Utah. He was a real entrepreneur. You know, he had big dreams. And so he was opening a grocery store there, the building right next door to Star Noodle. The Japantown was already established basically when we got there. Most of it was between Grant and all the way down to near the Union Station, about 3 blocks. And then it went from 24th Street and it goes down to Wall Avenue. And the one thing that's really memorable to me is that we lived a sheltered life because the Japanese community we're all considered Japantown, and all the merchants were all very close. And so it was a real tight community where they took care of each other. The Buddhist church was right around the corner from us, and so all of our activities were there, and we used to have dance socials and conferences where we would all get together and have a Japanese feast. We had a basement downstairs at the grocery store, and that's where we had our laundry room and everything. But then beyond that was a door that my dad prohibited us to go into. And it's dark and it's scary downstairs, you know, so we never did. I took a peek, but it was really dark. But my brother and his friends, they explored. It was one of those tunnels underneath the buildings, and a lot of it was supposed to be a passage to the opium den. So there were Chinese there too, and They had an opium den somewhere. Anyway, but they were always looking for it, never could find it, and found out it was in one of the tunnels. And I'm not sure how far those tunnels go because my brother went quite a ways, playing around and as kids, and then finally get chased out of there.
The Ogden Union Railroad Depot Company, which was controlled by the two railroads that met here, the passenger service has gone down. The building was severely underutilized. And so the railroad kind of wanted to get rid, I guess, of the thing. But it was a building of historic significance. So they approached the city to see if we would be interested in receiving the building as a donation. And at that time, we had begun to stir around and do things with 25th Street. And so it became logical, yeah, we would very much be interested in receiving the building, and doing something with it.
The Junior League was basically looking for projects, and the project that was one which was bubbling in the city was the preservation of Union Station. There was great discussion at the time whether the Union Station, the building itself, should be destroyed, should be taken down, because the city was discussing ways by which the western part of the city could be developed. And if they took the Union Station down, they thought that the 25th Street could come through and go on and develop the west. Well, our answer to that was Union Station was the anchor to 25th Street, and any destruction of this building would be a criminal act. It happened at a time when there was great interest in the community on the part of a lot of people. Politically, culturally, just general interest on the part of the people.
The museums themselves were run essentially by people interested in the museums. They decided what artifacts were there. They went out and found artifacts. They accepted artifacts that were offered to them, decided which ones to take and some to reject, and decided how the displays were going to be and what was going to be in the displays, put up the workings, the words that would go with the displays and why they were there and why they were important to the city of Ogden and to the museum and the railroad, in the case of the railroad museums.
And there were a lot of really very community-minded people and people interested in the history of Ogden and, with an appreciation of what was going on that came to that board. Teddy Griffiths was the first executive director of the board. Tom Moore, Carolyn Nebaker. There were certainly others, but those three in particular come to mind as being, perhaps a particular driving force behind what happened with Union Station.
My recollection is that the lobby was still presentable for what little train service there was just before it ended, but the rest of the building was in total disrepair. So when she got the position here in '77 to be the executive director of this renovation, the building was in terrible shape. Yeah, she was starting from scratch with the rest of the building. It was really rough.
The Myra Powell Gallery was, if you went up there, it was sort of like a raceway for pigeons. There were a lot of pigeons there. And what is now the Car Museum, as I recall, they had a wooden floor. It was a very interesting wooden floor. The wood was stacked endwise, so it was like a whole bunch of bricks on the floor. And water had gotten into it, and so the wood had swelled, so the floor was just, kind of up and buckling. And so it was, there were parts of it that were it needed help.
Mom would be the first person to credit many, many people for what went on here, and she would be horrified if because of my pride in what she achieved here, she'd be horrified if we didn't acknowledge that there was a large cast of characters here that both mentored her and just outright helped her, and were down on hands and knees scraping floors. And the people that were in here breaking down walls and restoring this place and living in the dust and the muck and rodents and things like that. She was often very involved in the renovation itself. She'd come home all dirty, and she would enlist our family sometimes to do a few things. My dad and my brothers would get hauled down here for various things.
And she was marvelous. Just, I mean, to take something that was vacant, unused, ill-used, and create the museums, create activities, get grants, all of the things that she did is just, was just terrific. She was just absolutely magnificent at it. And like I say, the board was also really very instrumental in going out and reaching out to people who could make donations, both monetarily and otherwise, towards the station. And were, very willing and anxious to do that. More of the focus was on making Union Station a destination rather than just a community center, So, I mean, that's why the Browning Arms were important, because that was something that was of interest beyond Ogden. I mean, the Browning collection is kind of a major international thing.
The other person, which I suddenly, for some reason, my mind is not clear as to remember her name, I adored her. She decided that she had seen an article about Ed Lanning, the most famous muralist in America. And she said to me, Tom, let's go after the last grant that he wishes to give, the last mural he'll ever paint. I said, are you kidding me? I said, he did Ellis Island and all these great big ones in the East. Why would he come to Ogden? And before I finished my statement, I said, I know why he came to Ogden. He'll come to Ogden because it's the greatest story to be told. This is where America became one. And so this lady whose name I have forgotten, and Carolyn Nebaker and Teddy Griffith and I got together and we wrote the grant. We knew that was never going to happen. Well, within a month or two, the grant was granted and given to Union Station to record the history of the building of the railroad, and we couldn't believe it. Suddenly we got renderings of the mural. I said, this is impossible. And here it is. If you come to Union Station now, you see in the main lobby, you see Ed Lanning's great murals. This is the kind of thing that happened at Union Station. It was a gathering place for people of immense background.
It was beginning to be recognized again. It was beginning to be used. People, started to, Oktoberfest, all of a sudden there's this thing here at Union Station every year that was Oktoberfest. And again, that was one of the things that brought lots of folks down here and interacting and people held weddings and receptions and dinners, and the Chamber of Commerce held some of their annual banquets here at Union Station.
I remember they had all these old cars. I love that. That was one of the things that the Union Station hosted, was the antique car show. Oh my gosh, they're beautiful.
I think the people I haven't thanked in this are the volunteers. The volunteers down there, they just made everything. We realized that right off the beginning. Teddy Wood, she was just, she was sort of in charge of the volunteers, even though we sort of tried to run the museum. She was in charge of the people that go around, they make the museums interesting, understandable, and relevant to the people that come in and visit them. And the volunteers, they just did a fantastic job.
When I was doing this, they still had a lot of the old railroaders all those guys who had worked for the railroads in the 30s and 40s and who had hung out in the bars and stuff on 25th Street. They were alive, they were here, and the old guys loved to talk.
It was almost exclusively, I believe, the museums were staffed by volunteers. And, you know, the railroad community, I'm not a part of it, but I've noticed just how tight they are. When they retire, they stay in, they're lifers, right? They stay in for life. And I don't think there was any shortage of retired railroad employees who would volunteer here and love to tell the stories of the railroads and even the Browning Arms.
I would receive donations from various sources in our library. And one day an envelope, large manila envelope, came along, and it came with a document called A Day in the Life of an Engineer. And it was made in 1945 by one of the Union Pacific reporters doing it for their company newsletter. And so I'm looking at these, and here is this picture showing the engineer and the conductor in front of the big boy 4020, and the conductor was posed handing orders to the engineer. And I looked at that conductor and I said, that's awfully familiar. And sure enough, it was my father, the only image I had of him on the job. And then there was a second picture towards the end of the photo story in which he and his brakeman are standing on the back of the caboose as it goes out Riverdale going east to Wyoming. And so those two images, I was so thrilled to see those.
I think it's the center of really, you know, as they, like you said, they call it junction. Just for a reason, yeah, because a lot goes on here, you know, even though I'm not constantly involved in it. But, you know, it seems to revolve around the Union Station, you know. You know, one makes you wonder, would there be a 25th Street that wasn't a Union Station? You don't know, but yeah. But, you know, they're connected, you know, like this. So, but, yeah, it's made a big difference in this community. That's, you hear about it a lot, you know, so it's the center of all that. Always has been, yeah, from what I recall.
So I don't know the future of the Union Station. I hope we preserve it because it is something that I believe is just one of our most incredible landmarks in Ogden City. And knowing that it was a melting pot of many communities of the past, and I do believe of now, and I hope for the future, that as a community we continue to enter its hallways and use it for community. That's my hope for the Union Station.